the same way that a rose in a soybean field is a weed, dirt in a household or soil in a household that's displaced, like that would be dirt, versus in a natural environment where it's expected and welcomed to soil.
Hello, I'm Nina Prater, and in this episode of Voices from the Field, I'm excited to talk with Dr. Faye Smith, a soil scientist with a background in soil sustainability and land management. In this conversation, we are going to talk about the ways we can all understand soil better so that we can take care of it better. Soil is the foundation of ecologically and economically sound farms and ranches, but it is often misunderstood and, in our opinion, underappreciated. But hopefully by the end of the episode, all our listeners will be as in awe of the majesty of soils as we are. Welcome, Faye.
It's really awesome to be able to talk to you and do this podcast with you. It's my first time. But anytime someone asks me if I want to talk about soil, I ask, do you have, a few hours on your hands? So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. So we were on a soil panel discussion recently, and you mentioned that there are only 15,000 or so soil scientists in the US. Is that accurate? Did I get that number right?
Well, so in my digging, and this is using like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we are clumped together with the plant scientists as well. So combined, about 15,000. This is not like crunchy numbers, but just in general, it seems like there's more plant scientists out there. So our numbers are super, super tiny.
Super tiny, even smaller than I thought.
So it's crazy that two of us are together talking.
I know. The chances are slim. Like, I wanted to put that into perspective. So I looked up how many total adults there are in the United States. So in the US Census as of 2024, there were 266,978,000 some odd adults in the US. And then I did the math, and that means that plant and soil scientists make up 0.006% of the adult population.
Yeah, I did another talk for Crystal Bridges. It was a really interesting one talking about soil, and I wanted to put this number into a infographic for a presentation. And I tried doing this, and it was the value was so small that if you tried to do a grid of it, you just have to zoom in again, zoom in. It was like CSI level, like get closer, trying to it's pretty wild how few of us there are with how important soil and land management is.
Right, right. So, considering how niche this field is, what drew you to soil science? How did you find it as a field of study? What called to you about soil science?
Well, actually, I kind of want to hear your take on it first, and then I'll tell you what drew me in. Because yeah, it
Okay.
is a super niche one.
Yeah. Well, when I went to undergrad, I studied English and environmental science, and I had never heard of soil science. I loved the sciences though, and I especially loved geology. I don't know why. I just think rocks are cool.
Rocks rock. I get
Rocks
it.
rock. I like being able to look at a landscape and understanding why it looks the way it looks. So why the Appalachians are kind of rounded and smoothed off versus the Rocky Mountains being really jagged and huge. And then I started working on farms in the summers between college years and loved that. Eventually, I ended up living on a farm with my now husband in Arkansas, and the 2008 to 10 recession hit, and I was like, I need to go back to school, I think. And so I thought, well, we're farming, but if I go back to school, I should study that will either help on the farm if we like just stay with farming, or that I could get a job in. And so soil science was kind of what I was
Hmm.
drawn to. So that's how I ended up going to school at the U of A, University of Arkansas, to study soil because I thought it'll help either way, whether I'm a farmer or something else. So yeah, that's how I got to where I am now.
That's awesome. I love hearing from other people like how they got into their own little niches, especially with scientists, because we're weirdos. We get super focused on one thing. So for me, I actually started in a combination of political science and environmental science. I took environmental science, AP environmental science in high school, and I was also doing debates. I was also a poli sci nerd for a while. But what I really wanted to do, and the reason why I went and was interested in environmental science, is between both of those fields, it was what is or asking the question, what is a complex problem that needs support, needs research, needs help, in order to protect those that are underprivileged or their voices are not heard. What are things that are going on in this world that like we could do better for everyone involved? And I also just love a good puzzle. So in environmental science in high school, we had to read through the IPCC, and it was mind blowing. All of the data, just seeing how not just political science, because that's also a big part of it if you look through like policy matters and stuff, but all of the other scientists in these different fields coming together to try and figure out just how the heck the world works and what problems that are kind of are solvable that we can figure out more. The more we know, the more we can do. And soil was this big question mark when it came to landscape formation, for instance, or with problems with erosion going into like waterways, so with like water quality, where is that coming from? What's the soil? What's happening in the soil? It seemed to be one of the dirtiest problems, the most confusing, right? And the one that didn't seem to have as much research behind it as some of the other fields. And I'm not saying for everything, but it really it stuck out to me. I love putting myself in hard places, and I thought, what's what's messier than trying to study soil? And so that's really my sort of like driving mechanism behind it was can I use my love of puzzle solving in order for us to have more information about protecting land, managing resources, and also just figuring out cool stuff that's going on.
That's so interesting. I love how you take something that you're passionate about, solving puzzles and also helping humanity
Yeah.
and contributing your skills to that. That's amazing. That's so I feel like your approach was much more altruistic than mine, where I'm just like, I like it. I want to do it.
I I will say soil science, well, I'm saying it's kind of like the messier or the dirtier of them, trying
Hmm.
to ask a question, and it's, it can be extremely difficult in a environment that is soiled to ask a single question as a scientist and do a really good experiment. What is messier is political science, and people are people are messier. So the world of science, like hard science, is definitely got my attention a little bit more because of that too. People are a little bit messier than soil, so
I agree. I agree. I understand soil better than I do people a lot of
yeah.
the time. So speaking of dirt, before we get into more of the science side of our conversation, I wanted to get a little philosophical for a minute. So, to you, a soil scientist, what is the difference between soil and dirt?
So I want to do this thing that a professor has done to me before, which is to answer your question with a question. What what would you say is the difference between a weed and a plant?
Mm. I I have an answer to this, and I someone told me a weed is just a plant out of place, and I loved that
So,
answer.
so dirt is just soil out of place from our perspective.
Yeah.
So the same way that a rose in a soybean field is a weed, dirt in a household or soil in a household that's displaced, like that would be dirt, versus in a natural environment where it's expected and welcomed, just soil.
What a great answer. Yeah. Yeah. Now I love etymology, like the study of where words come from, because I feel like it tells you something about that word too. And so I looked up the etymology of soil and dirt. And soil has its roots in Latin, going back to solum, which means base or ground or soil, or related to sole, Solea, which means sandal. So kind of like the sole of your shoe. And then dirt comes from Middle English, drit from Old Norse, and then it's akin to the Old English dritan, which means to defecate. And
Perfect.
and
Oh,
so
that's
like
some
the connotations of the difference. It's like the ground, the sole of your foot, the very thing we stand on, and then you poop. Good old Latin makes its way into science all the time. So let's talk about soil. What are some common ways people misunderstand the soil or have misunderstood it in the past?
from talking to general audiences, so going out and doing like our soils talk the other day, what I have noticed is that people don't look at soil as the ecosystem that it is. We think of ecosystems of, in the ocean and waters and lakes, even in, more arid climates, but you're not thinking about the soil as anything more as a floor. So the idea that this is a living ecosystem that has air, it has water, it has living organisms all in it, and that you have to treat it as that ecosystem, I think is a really missed concept that has made it so people aren't thinking about why we should protect soil because we're not thinking about it as an environment.
Yeah, yeah, I think a lot of times people think of it just as like the mineral component. That
Yeah,
is a big
like a
part of soil, but it's not the only part.
or yeah, or like a growing media, right? Which is different than soil. It is a matrix, you can grow things in it, but it's so much more complex than that.
Given that, what kind of like mindset shift do people need to make to like properly steward the soil, take care of it, nourish that ecosystem?
A shift can happen when you talk to people who do know a little bit about soil. They can throw out some facts like 3 out of 4 antibiotics that we take currently come from the soil, come from soil organisms. Us studying that, so knowing that there are critters in there that are connected to us that we need. Also, going in and seeing like the different soil structures, really the experience of it, either in a educational setting or just going out and noticing, oh, look, I see the erosion and I also see like the soil structures and the aggregates within, can do a lot of good for kind of a general appreciation. Park services have done a really cool job of allowing us to go in and see all of these different ecosystems. Now, if they would throw in like a soil pit every so often for us to go in and look, that might be cool.
Oh, that'd be
uh,
amazing.
right? I'm getting shudders thinking about the idea. Uh, but I think that that is one shift just to say, just to show people how cool and complex it is. But then also educating people on the effects of the degradation of that ecosystem as well. I think would, including like, really bad erosion, so poor water quality, inability to sustain like farming practices, all of those things, I think also will, kind of on a less exciting side of things give a deeper appreciation for, why we do need to protect these resources.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I remember learning about sort of the decline of civilizations like Mesopotamia and how it's linked to evidence that the soil degraded, and that's what led to that decline. And yeah, it's not like fun to think about, a whole civilization going away, but it really hits home the importance of taking care of the soil for the long term.
We learn about this in all different types of ecosystems, right? Even with like air quality. Sometimes we learn things the hard way. Some of us, some of us more than others, but seeing, the negative effects of poor air quality on human health, on also health of different ecosystems, made us have a deeper appreciation for it. And so if we can kind of shift that same mindset to our soil resources, that would improve our sustainability as civilizations, because we're talking about ancient civilizations. We're still a civilization that is dependent on our soil, and and you know, being good stewards means that we can all have a little bit healthier lives.
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember where I read something about like how it's a goal we should have is to be a good ancestor to future generations. So
Yeah,
I want to leave our farm soil better off than I got it so that future generations will thank me instead of
yeah.
curse me. So what is a healthy soil and what kind of long-term management strategies are scientifically supported that people should use to build soil health?
So this is the trick when it comes to managing soil and soil sustainability is doing bench or providing benchmarks or health checks. So we figured out certain health checks for different ecosystems, like air or water quality, for instance. When it comes to soil, it's a little bit trickier. For a long time, we were just measuring or mostly measuring the mineral composition of the soil and not paying a lot of attention to aggregate stability, for instance, and I'll define that later if you want. And soil organic matter became really important in the last century to measure and to use as one of these kind of benchmarks. Kind of like if you go to the doctor and you get your temperature checked, you get your weight checked. We're still trying to establish the best benchmarks for soil. Now, what's a healthy soil in one system might also be very different for another system. A wetland healthy soil may be very, very different than a soybean field soil.
Mhm.
And in terms of what we're getting out of those systems. So it's important to have benchmarks that also reflect those differences. It's a very holistic one. It's really complicated, but aggregate stability and organic matter composition tend to be extremely high on the list of almost any healthy soil as far as doing a health check.
It's hard to gauge what healthy is because what healthy is in one part of the state or one part of the country is going to look very different than like what the expectations are for a soil in another region. And like you said, what the use is, wetland versus soybeans, like you have different expectations for those things. So let's say in like an agricultural setting, what are functions that healthy soils do well?
So, in an agricultural setting, what we are wanting to see is a soil that retains nutrients, doesn't allow those nutrients to run off into our waterways or not be available for plants. We also want to see a soil that has good aeration or a good amount of air that is able to penetrate through, because roots also need to breathe. And we want to see good water infiltration, meaning that the water is either whenever it's applied through irrigation or through precipitation, it's able to go down into the soil and not just run off the surface. And we want to see kind of sustained give and take of nutrients. And by that, I mean your soil is able to kind of act like a sponge. And the way that a soil retains all of those properties is through what I just mentioned of or increased organic matter and increased what we term aggregate stability. So a soil aggregate is essentially clumps of soil that are held more tightly together to each other than the surrounding soil matrix. So if you scoop up some soil and then you allow the particles to kind of fall apart naturally, you'll see that there are these clumps. Those are aggregates. Within the soil, these aggregates, if they have good stability, they will continue to stay together even whenever it gets flooded or if there's kind of mechanical abrasion happening, it's able to hold together. That means less erosion. It also means the organic matter that's trapped inside is more protected. That organic matter also has what we call a high CEC or cation exchange capacity, meaning that there are these chemical sites, chemical binding sites for the nutrients that your plants need. So it's able to give and take nutrients depending on different environments. And that's really what we're looking for in a good agricultural soil. In addition to pH and a whole bunch of other things, but yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of ways to
Lots of,
measure soil.
but
Um,
but uh, aggregate stability, the ability of those aggregates to stay together, and high organic matter are the two big key things.
yeah, and they kind of reflect, even if you don't have a microscope, they kind of reflect the the biological activity that's going on in a way that we can see.
Absolutely, because if you're thinking about those aggregates, they're also nice little kind of houses for your fungi to be able to grow through, the bacteria to also thrive, and for the roots to be able to get through the cracks in between. That increases the aeration. It's a huge biological system. If you have poor aggregate stability, though, it's essentially like you had all of these really nice warehouses that you had all of your storage in, and then it just gets decimated by a tornado coming through. So it's all like all over the place in pieces, and you also increase all of kind of the negative effects of runoff and um, erosion and lack of retaining nutrients. Your roots won't be able to grow through. All of those things happen whenever you have poor organic matter and poor aggregate stability.
Hmm. Yeah. So, and like a lot of people have heard of compacted soils, and that's a
Yeah,
situation where your
that's
aggregates
a
have been squashed basically by the tornado. So
that's
that's
the
a,
tornado.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and all the compaction gets rid of that good pore space and everything. So it's all tied together.
Yeah, and people do think of tillage as a way of aerating the soil and making it fluffy. And while that can have certain benefits in certain situations, so annual sustained tillage, especially like deep tillage, over and over again every single year, will cause all of your aggregates to start breaking down. So that might lead to you having compacted soil over time and also increased erosion and yeah, all of those things we just talked about.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think you mentioned during the soil panel that sometimes tillage is necessary.
Right. Minimal tillage, when
Hmm.
you're using it for specific purposes like turning in a cover crop or something
Hmm.
like that, or you use it to incorporate compost or things like that, where you're adding organic matter to the soil and you're not doing it just because it's that time of year and that's what we do.
You
So,
made me so happy when you said that because I mean I do think that minimal tillage and definitely transitioning if you can to no tillage is ideal. But in times whenever you are incorporating organic matter, like you said, you are feeding all of the organisms in there that are create helping to create those aggregates as well, and increasing your organic matter composition. So time and a place, I guess,
E-
is.
Exactly. It's very context dependent. I know some farms in drier places that have tried to go no-till have had buildup on the surface of the soil and have had issues with trying to do no-till. So
Mhm.
it's very context dependent, but
Yeah.
minimum till, I think, is a pretty universal rule. Yeah. Before we move on from aggregation, I wanted to mention that we have some videos on the NCAT ATTRA YouTube channel that show you how you can sort of look at your own soils aggregation. I can link to those in the show notes. So farmers and ranchers have to run, maintain their soil's health, but also they have to maintain their business's health because it is a business. What's the economic argument for soil health? How do these strategies fit in with like farms' overall economics?
There's a challenge in creating more sustainable agricultural practices, that is very economic, and you have to be mindful of it. So there were government programs to help transition because, for instance, your planter might change if you move from no-till or move from tillage and burning to no-till. No burning, you're gonna have a lot of residue that you have to plant into. So you might need to have different expensive equipment that you might not be able to maybe afford. Also, changing large scale practices also means that you might be putting some of your financial, budget on the line, your annual income. And that could, I mean, that feels scary. That is totally reasonable for it, to feel scary, which is the reason why, like, we do have some organizations that are stepping in to help transition, to make sure that the management practices that you are implementing are based in science and give you a little bit extra confident in your ability to sustain not just your soil, but also sustain kind of your income. So there's a scientific backing. We have to continue to do research, especially long-term field trials are so incredibly important, not just on the soil end, but also on yields and economic values of that. Because a lot of times, if you transition, you might not get as high of a yield, but you might also not be inputting as much fertilizer and pesticides and other inputs, depending on which practice that you're choosing. So that balancing act might feel a little scary, but in the end result, especially in no-till practices and in cover crop implementation, doing rotations, that you do end up on the positive side economically.
Yeah, making a big change, even if it seems small to outsiders, but it can be a huge change for farmers. And if you're risking your whole year's income, that's a huge risk and it's super scary. So one thing like we suggest is to just transition a part of your farm, part of your acreage into a new system and sort of work out the kinks and then expand. And we've had farmers do that with great success. They have seen, I'm thinking of Adam Chappell specifically, a row crop farmer in Arkansas. He kind of led the way in soil health practices in row cropping. And a huge number of his costs went down when he started cover cropping and doing more diverse cover cropping and things like that. And so when your inputs go down, if your output, what's the word? Harvest,
Yeah, like your yields.
your
Yeah.
yields, I was like, what's the word? Yields. If your yields, even if they just stay the same or even go down a little, as long as your profit is the same or better, then you're golden. So a lot of times I feel like people are constantly thinking they have to increase their yield to make more money, but there's also the aspect of decreasing your costs. So
Yeah, and long-term cost also needs to be taken into consideration as well, because if you are losing your soil due to erosion or essentially downstream impacting negatively your soil health, that can also decrease yields, and then you're still putting in more, inputs, more fertilizers. I can see why certain for-profit organizations are pushing for for increased inputs. I mean, you can see where the bias might lie. I'm not saying that like that's all bad or anything, but um looking at unbiased, like you said, research where, I'm not making money off of farmers buying buying anything really, just out there trying to figure out, what are these different effects, especially in long-term field studies. I think those are super important. Also short-term ones, just to see like what happens, what to expect in the next, couple of years. Leaning on the science and looking at peer review because scientists are really tough on each other. Doing this in the name of figuring out the puzzle. Same with soil health, same with human health. I love making this analogy because it's closer to home.
Yeah, it's usually the simple, boring solutions of like continuously taking care of either your soil or yourself, continuously feeding yourself or your soil a balanced diet, and giving it the conditions it needs to thrive. So, speaking of the research, you mentioned earlier in our conversation that soil science is messy and hard to puzzle out because it's such a complex system. So I was wondering, since you've been involved in the research much more than I have, what are some of the like challenges of getting to know soil better, and what are some questions that you would like to see explored more?
The one big question that I have that I would love to do more research in is when a soil starts heating up a little bit, what are those microbes doing and how does that translate to the carbon storage within the soil? I think carbon storage in general in soil is a giant, like, big question that we're all trying to solve. We know kind of some of the mechanisms behind carbon storage and carbon sequestration in soil systems. But when we're trying to predict in all of these different ecosystems, like, wetland versus an agricultural setting, or, maybe up in the permafrost, if you want to talk about that environment, how to predict how that carbon is going to react to not just a warming of that environment, but also other changes, like climatic changes, is really important. It's a big question because predicting things means that we can react before too many bad things happen. Going in and trying to figure out, how if one ecosystem starts getting a little bit warmer, what if, we start getting saltwater intrusion in one? How is that going to affect the carbon storage and how is that carbon potentially, how's it going to move up or down from the atmosphere into the system and vice versa?
Yeah, yeah, and in a field where haha, where people are have to have solid predictions, we talk about predicting the weather all the time, but like year over year, need to be able to know how our soils are going to react to changes, extreme weather events, things like that. I mean, people's livelihoods are dependent on being able to be good predictors.
Exactly. And one of the most difficult parts of this is that we know that the soil is full of microorganisms. We can see them under the microscope. We can do DNA and RNA tests. We see that they're doing things, but we only really know about like 1% of the organisms that are in the soil. Like I've seen like some people say like up to 5%, but if you think about the soil being probably the most diverse ecosystem in the world, the fact that we know so little means that the question mark just is it's huge when it comes to how these environments, which are created and sustained by all of these little bugs that we don't know very well. How are they going to react to changes? That I think is one of the biggest, like, kind of unexplored, or not unexplored, but lesser explored areas in the world, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, soil science is a very relatively new science compared to
Yeah.
others. And
But
and just the technology to be able to study things at that scale is still evolving. So I think there's a lot of room for growth and in that area. I'm excited to see what emerges in the coming years. So we've talked a little bit about farm resilience. What do you think some keys are to building resilient soil and resilient farm systems?
the things that we've already talked about are the major ones on on like a farm to farm level. Minimal till, cover cropping, rotating is really good. Those are changes that you can make on a farm to farm scale that will continue to make your farm more resilient. We can see that in the data. Now, when it comes to which microorganisms might be helping out, which ones are, potentially like a future probiotic. That would be a really cool thing for us in the science world to help contribute. We're not there yet. We haven't untangled that picture just yet, but we do know that it's like if you build it, they will come. If you start building your organic matter, if you don't crush all of the homes with tornadoes, all the time, that you get higher biodiversity, and that leads to resilience. Which organisms are doing what is still kind of in question. We know some of them, like certain fungi, but we do know that high biodiversity means that when one organism might not be reacting well to a situation, we have redundancies in activities from different organisms that can kind of step in and take their place.
So you mentioned you didn't know, we don't know yet, like if there's a probiotic for the soil. I've seen a lot of products for sale that advertise, they're like, microorganisms that you can apply or inoculants, or I've seen people making compost teas and stuff. And every time I see those, I think, well, they're probably not bad for the soil, but are they actually doing anything? Like I always fall back on the like instinctively the if you build it they will come kind of thing. So am I on the right track? Like I always feel like, I don't know.
Yeah, and everything that I say as a scientist, always a grain of salt, right? I don't like saying things completely in black and white because that actually is just usually not the case when it comes to this. We do know that there are certain organisms that have symbiotic relationships with our plants. So, inoculates on soybean seed, for instance, those have been extremely fruitful. But when it comes to non-specific symbiotic relationship inoculate, these kind of like broad spectrum, if you will, probiotics, I don't see any evidence that that is really increasing anything or doing anything that we can measure. They do claim a lot of impressive things. I don't think it's actually doing anything harmful from what I've seen either. From also a different perspective, me trying to even isolate, all of this, bacteria and protists and fungi just to study in the lab, they don't like being taken out of the soil. There's a reason why we know that they're there, but we really don't know more than, 1 to 5% of them. Just keep that in mind whenever considering spending a lot of money on a product that is making uh, larger than life claims, I would say. When in doubt, maybe ask a scientist.
Right, you might be better off investing in cover crop seed or compost or
Yeah,
something else.
yeah,
There's no easy quick fix for anything.
yeah. Usually not. Sometimes there are certain things, but if someone tells you that there's a quick and easy fix, but you just have to pay them a lot of money, always just consider the bias.
Yes. Consider the bias. That's really good life lesson for any area for sure. And I think there's a lot of gratification to be had for the slow and steady fixes, you know? If anybody could just run a marathon at any time, it wouldn't be something to brag about. You work really hard towards it and you accomplish that, there's so
Yeah.
much fulfillment. So same with building up your soil's health. In another interview I did with Dr. Johannes Lehmann of Cornell University, he talks about the continuous care model of farming. And I just thought that what a beautiful phrase, like continuous care for our farms and our landscapes and ourselves. So I just thought that was really nice.
I like that. I reminds me of so I love houseplants and I have given advice to certain people regarding like their care for houseplants and sometimes leave it alone is a good which also for the soil sometimes too, like let it breathe, let it be for a sec. Because sometimes you just need to let it rest. I've seen so many people kill their houseplants with love. And I'm like, I think it translates sometimes to farming situations too. You get worried and you want to do something. And like sometimes you just have to let it put a cover crop on it, let it be fallow for a sec. Like
Yeah, that's so funny. That reminds me of my mom. Hi, Mom. She said her parenting strategy was strategic neglect.
that's I love that.
Like, obviously taking good care of us, but leaving us alone so we can figure things out ourselves too, you know? And plants need to be exposed to challenges to grow. Like a lot of the flavors that food grows is in response to environmental stressors. So I wanted to ask you so we can leave our listeners with something to go and explore. What are some of your favorite resources to learning about soil and these areas? Some like books or podcasts or I don't know, videos or whatever.
Well, of course, NCAT, so nonprofit. Uh, there are other nonprofits like the Soil Health Institute. Shout out to them. Also, they have some really great educational resources as well. I would say for podcasts, I know Ologies had I with Ali Ward had an amazing one on they had a soil scientist who also studied and works in native soil lands. It was super cool. It was a fun listen for sure. Oh, I do want to mention this. I ran across a watercoloring set that is made of soils, different colored soils. I kid you not, is the coolest thing. It is called The Art of Soil. So if you look it up, it's a small woman-owned business. They have backgrounds in soil science. It is amazing. So definitely check them out. Shout out to the small business owners doing their best, collecting soils from all over the world. They had different ecosystems, and then you could paint with them.
Oh my
Just crazy.
gosh.
I love creativity in people, and yeah, it just warms my heart.
That is the coolest thing I've heard all day. And I will be adding that to my birthday list. Wow, that's amazing. And I love the interdisciplinary approach, art,
Yeah,
science, soil, food, it all comes
yeah,
together.
yeah,
Those are some great recommendations. Thank you. And I haven't listened to that Ologies episode yet, so I have
yeah,
that to look forward to.
yeah. Search for native podology.
So just to close out, and get a little philosophical again, you mentioned air and water as systems that really are comparable to soil, but we don't think of soil in those terms. How should we think about soil as it's in its role in our society? Is it similar to how we think about air and water, or
How do you not think about soil and its role in society? I mean, if you consider this, there is no ecosystem that we interact with more than I would say the soil, right? Because, sometimes we, build stuff, we try to like over the top of it and try to get away from it. But we also need it for food. We need it for water filtration. right? Systems are already in place to make sure that water that comes into the system, which is the soil ecosystem, comes out in a form that we can drink and utilize, and that a whole bunch of other animals can eat and drink and utilize. It is a place where, can have a beautiful forest growing in it, and you can go walk with the soil, and those forests wouldn't be there if not for the soil. You need a mental health break, you're going out, you're being around soil. So I think it's hard to even conceptualize a system in which we are away from soil.
It's so omnipresent that we almost don't see it. It's like the fish not noticing the water, or,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
yeah. So I think that's great. I think maybe taking time to follow back all of the things we use in our day-to-day life to the soil. The cotton shirt we wear started in the
Yeah.
soil. The wool sweater we wear started on a sheep that was on the grass that was growing in the soil. It's just maybe if we connect the dots back to the soil more consciously, then maybe everyone will appreciate it.
I just thought of something.
Yeah.
You know that phrase, go touch grass? When
Yes.
someone I'm gonna just start saying go touch soil.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are antidepressant organisms in the soil, or, that's,
Yeah. There are also antibiotics in the soil. Don't eat soil though, like if you don't know where it
yeah.
I had to say that because I had a undergrad class that I took out to the field, and I was explaining to them like that old school podologist would taste for like salt content and texture by putting, and I didn't realize that they would immediately start I was giving them kind of anecdotal. And then they just like agricultural soil that had just been sprayed. Like, yeah, my eyes got real big for a second. It's like I'm in charge of people.
Oh my
So go,
goodness. Yeah.
go
Yeah.
touch soil, but if you don't put anything in your mouth that you don't know where it was.
Yeah. Good rule of thumb. Good rule of thumb. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me today and sharing your soil wisdom. I can't wait to share this with everybody, and we will link to relevant resources in the show notes. Yeah, and I think after we wrap up, I'm going to go touch some soil.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do the same.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.